Hi, and welcome to News and Brews Sports Biz, the To The Point podcast and video series that features new developments related to the coronavirus pandemic and other emerging issues impacting the business of college sports. I'm your host, Katie Davis, the leader of the James Moore Collegiate Athletics Services team. You are in for a treat with today's guest. She's one of my favorite people in the industry because I like to think we are sort of kindred spirits as similar, like living outside of the box personalities. So a big welcome to Debra Boughton. She's the Chief of Staff, Senior Associate Athletics Director for Revenue Generation, and Senior Woman Administrator at Northern Illinois University Athletics. Go Huskies.
Right.
So Debra has a unique perspective to share as she wears multiple hats in her role at NIU. And she's been eating budgetary challenges for breakfast there for multiple years. Those are my words, not hers, but I'm pretty sure she feels that assessment pretty well. And as a member of the MAC, the first FBS conference to announce the decision to not compete this fall, we're going to talk about leading an athletics program through a fall with no sports. Debra and I just came off of a Lead One CFO webinar where Debra shared her perspective as a panelist on navigating the financial fallout of COVID-19. And it was a really great conversation that we had, and I'm hoping that we can build on some of that. So first things first, Debra, cheers to a successful webinar, and let's talk about what brew are you having today?
Well, I have Schlafly from St. Louis. I have a Kolsch today. We went to this brewery a number of years ago when we visited the Arch in St. Louis, so I figured that would be a good one for today. What about you?
Yeah, so I went to, I've been featuring a lot of Gainesville brews just because we're not getting out very much, but there's a local craft beer shop that sells beers from all over the place. And I specifically went in yesterday asking for a Midwest beer. There wasn't anything from Illinois, but Goliath Brewing is out of Iowa. But this particular one is a collaboration with the Field Museum, and it's called King Sue, which is a double IPA.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, this is awesome because it's close to you, and it's actually really good. So it's I drink a lot of IPAs on here, and this one's a really good one. So I'm glad I found it.
Fantastic. That's a great connection. That's great.
Yes. So first, start off sharing a little bit about your history in athletics. What got you started, and how did you get to where you're at today?
Yeah, I was thinking about these questions, and this is actually one of my favorite ones to talk about. The reason I work in college athletics is because I couldn't play football quarterback at Notre Dame, right? So I was 9 years old, and my dad says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "I want to be the quarterback at Notre Dame." And he was like, okay, we should probably talk about this. And it was one of those real kind of mark moments for me. I'm a daddy's girl, and it was the first time I'd ever heard that I can't do something. I couldn't be able to achieve that dream for obvious reasons. And so he got me involved in soccer. Anyway, long story short, I ended up playing college soccer at Trinity University. It's a small college in San Antonio. Absolutely loved it, loved every minute of it, wouldn't have changed a thing. I also met one of my favorite people in the world who is an accounting, unfortunately she's passed away, but an accounting professor at Trinity. And, I was kind of a kid that Trinity was hard for me. It was that everybody was smart. It's like going to Division I and playing athletics, right? Everybody's good. So at Trinity, everybody was smart. And I was like, oh my gosh, how do I fit in here? I took an accounting class, and this professor just locked in on me and said, "This is what you're going to do, and I love athletes, and this is going to happen for you." And so 4 years later, I was at an undergrad in accounting, and that was the first year that you had to get to 150 for the CPA, right? So I took a master's program it was the first year of the master's program, and it was with this professor. So I stayed on, I got my master's degree, and then sat for the CPA and passed it. And kind of the rest is history. Along the way, my athletic director at Trinity, one day we had like a day of 6 events one day. I think it was the spring, because I think I was done playing soccer. So it's the spring semester of my senior year. I think we had a baseball game, softball game, a track meet, and 2 tennis matches going on at the same time. And I'm walking around our athletic facilities, and I'm like, this is it. This is what I want to do the rest of my life. And it just so happened that I was able to combine something I was super good at, which was accounting, with something that I really loved, which was not only being a college athlete, but being around it on the after, right? Being around it afterwards. And I've told that story probably in every interview that I've ever been on, right? But it's one of those things that it really starts you off. And I think it's not that you have to be a college athlete to work in college athletics, because there's some great people that work in the business that weren't former athletes. But I think it helps. I think it helps give you a perspective. It helps you have a gut check on things that you unfortunately or fortunately have to do. But yeah, so that it basically started back with the Notre Dame discussion, that was not going to be an option for me. So a few short years later, here I am in Northern Illinois. I'm originally from Texas, so this is a little bit of a leap for me. Although we've been here 10 years, so there's no excuses now. Like we've locked into the cold and we're in. So yeah, that's how it started.
Yeah, so it's funny because I didn't know that about you, and I feel like we're so similar, but I always wanted to be like Ryan Sandberg, who played second base for the Cubs.
Right.
I mean, I wasn't a college athlete, so I didn't get that far, but always just have admired sports. And my grandmother was a PE major and lettered in like 17 different sports when she was in college years and years ago, and I've just always thought sports were so important, and love working in the industry too. So I totally feel you there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So one question that I feel like is a loaded question right now is what keeps you up at night? So I like to ask, what gets you up in the morning?
Yeah, there's been just so many up and downs lately. And I'll admit, initially, that first few weeks in March, that was more like I was up at night. I was like, what are we doing? Like the sleep wasn't happening. It was such a change to what we had planned. And I think it has turned into what I get up for in the morning, right? I was on vacation last week, and we had some things happen late in the week, and I got brought into it late, and then we made some different decisions by Monday. And it was one of those things, it's like, I'm excited to get back to see if we can figure out a different way to approach this. And, like you said, that's been career goals from the beginning. A better way to build a mousetrap. How do you get it done despite XYZ? I said it today on the webinar. I say it all the time. Our athletic director says it. A place like ours is made for something like this. Because if one direction doesn't go well, it's like, okay, fine, then we'll do something else. And that was how we were pre-COVID, and that's how we'll be post-COVID. Because at a place that doesn't have as many resources, that has to kind of work a little differently, you can't stop being creative. You'll get taken over and you'll get forgotten about. So it's just been more of that. So I think just every day getting up and saying, okay, what will it be? And this is a great time for this thing I have. I recently purchased this. I had this in my office. This is the decision-making dartboard, right? So for COVID, it says, well, what should we do? And then you put stickers on here on the options, and then you throw it. And where it lands, I feel like sometimes that's what we're doing, right? But obviously it's a joke, but at the same time, that's how certainly it felt from the beginning. Like, what should we do? I don't know. And my husband was like, well, make sure on there it says give somebody a hug, because obviously you can't give people hugs right now. But yeah, my COVID decision-making dartboard, because that's how it feels sometimes.
Yeah.
But every day you get up and you're like, okay, what we'll tackle today? What will we tackle? And that's why I think that's why college athletics is so exciting to begin with. Because again, I think pre-COVID, that's why you get up. And how do I fix it today? How do I get better? How do I make sure our kids have great experience? How do I make sure our coaches are successful? I mean, all those things. I don't let it change too much, to be honest. It's just a different method, maybe.
Well, a bigger challenge, but you've always dealt with the challenges, and yeah. So how are your athletes doing right now?
I think they're doing okay. We had a campus decision last week that kind of got us a little bit off our momentum. we brought our student athletes back kind of in stages. We did a great job, and really not only the coaches preaching the follow the rules, stay within your bubble, I guess, for lack of a better word. We need you to socially distance. We need you to follow the rules, and then us talking about it too, us just preaching it over and over and over and over again. And I mean, they're 20 years old. I would be hard for me to follow these rules at 20 years old. But they've been great soldiers in this. And unfortunately, we had a little bit of a setback on our campus, and we had a decision on Friday, and then we had a little bit of modification on a decision through the weekend. And I think they're doing okay. They're just a little numb. They're like a little bit like, what's next? I mean, kind of like us, everyone, the whole country, right? We've already moved, and this will come up obviously in pretty winter questions, but we've already moved fall sports to spring. You mentioned that the MAC has moved fall to spring. So that decision's made. So I think that was a great moment for them, because now they can focus on something else, at least those fall sport people. Well, now we get to have the winter sport people, like what's going to happen to us? And the spring sport people are like, oh, we already dealt with this. You're good. I was actually talking to our softball coach about a week ago, or no, a couple weeks ago. And she said, I like the way it happened for us, because it was just immediate. There wasn't just waiting around. Like fall took so long for us to decide if it was going to be safe enough, or what decision we were going to make based on the information we had. It just took so long. Mm-hmm. Whereas the spring, it was like March 9th or 12th or whatever day it was like, oh, you're done. Everybody's done. And I think that's what's going to happen for our winter sports. I mean, obviously, we want to try to compete. We want to make sure we do it in the most safe way. And obviously, people debate that point too, not only just in our industry, but nationally. And that makes it hard. I have an intern right now who's one of our women's basketball student athletes. And I said, what a great time to be in a leadership position. She's a captain too, in a leadership position, leading people in a crisis all the time. What a great thing. She's like, oh, I don't think so. I don't like it. I'm like, no, you will. You'll like it about 5 years from now when you're in a different situation and you're leading, because you're like, oh, I've already done this. I've held this position. I've led through a crisis. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. Like, this is a great opportunity for you to, and I'm having her write reflection papers of everything she does, mainly. So, well, some of it to have some time on the internship, but also looking back on those things. I wish I'd taken a tally of, emotions March 12th, emotions April 15th, but I didn't. Now it's all a blur, So hopefully she gets something really positive out of this. I don't know. Hopefully she gets to play basketball too.
Yeah. Well, I love to hear just your approach with how you're interacting with your athletes, how you're empowering them. And I mean, even at your level, it just shows how committed you and just the tone of senior staff at NIU is to, really going above the, crisis management in the silo. You really branch out a lot. And we talked some about that during the Lead One webinar, when we talked about navigating challenges since March and that evolution, and how you've created a committee of different people within the department to really look and challenge the status quo of the budget. And can you tell me more about who's involved in that committee, and even speak more to, I love you spoke specifically to your baseball coach getting involved and taking the lead on something, and you were like, it's not normal for a baseball head coach to take lead on the budget, but nothing's normal right now.
Right.
And I loved that. And so just maybe, tell a little bit more about ways you're challenging the status quo and who you have involved in that committee.
Yeah, so the finance committee was it's me and then two other of our senior staff members. But one of our senior staff member who oversees a lot of our auxiliary operations, like the convocation center where we have outside events. And then a person that was relatively new actually to the process, which was really great, because I love bringing new people into the process, because then they're like, well, why do we do it this way? And I'm like, well, we don't have to. This is just, how we have. So it's been really great. Obviously, our athletic director, checked in on us from time to time. And then, the rest of senior staff, kind of had pieces and parts. I talked about that whole value add with our student fee review. The other members of senior staff took that piece, and some of it probably from our athletic director's perspective was just to keep us locked in, because I can't imagine how, well, I can, because I did it, because I've got 2 head coaches that were like a mess. But that part of leading on keeping your people engaged, especially at the beginning, in our industry or others, when things change so quickly. I mean, fortunately, we were still employed. We were just working from home. That's no problem. But it really, the COVID, it took away everything that we do. Like a lot of our primary functions all of a sudden disappeared. So how do you find value again? Like, how do you say I'm contributing? And it's so important for your employees to feel that way. And I think as I look back now at the little committees that we did and everything, I feel like that was one of his main objectives, right? To keep us together, keep us communicating, even virtually, and maybe have someone have a different review of it, or a different skill set, or etc. The baseball coach thing was interesting, and actually I didn't really go into all the details earlier, but I mean, he's even helping fund part of our track scholarship out of his operating budget for this year. So it even got beyond that. It was like, hey, how are we going to do this? Of course, there were only, at the end of the day, I think there's only maybe 15 student athletes, and they're not on fulls, they're all partial kids, that we had to figure out solutions for. And I loved Chris and Clayton. They're like, oh yes, we're all supporting an initial or another year of eligibility, and we're paying for all of it. I'm like, we would love to. That would be great. We were obviously concerned about setting the precedent to cover it in the spring, because we had a very keen sense that this would happen this fall. And we might have been able to cover, maybe been able to try to parcel together some operating dollars for the spring, but the fall is just going to be, it would be insurmountable, I think, unless we shifted all of our efforts to fundraise for that.
Yeah.
If we were talking about 30 more full scholarships for football, and you can see where it all adds up, and so we just couldn't set the precedent. Even if it was like, well, it's not that much more, but it just wasn't something that we felt like long-term we would be able to invest in. So yeah, but our baseball coach, he did all the numbers, although I don't know. I mean, we probably need to double check him a tiny bit, but he's really good. He's actually a very, very competent spreadsheet guy. So I really like the collaboration and among the sport programs, and I thought that was a really neat, result of kind of a really crummy situation. And I thought that was, and long term, again, I think some of these, I talked about it earlier, I think some of these things that we're doing now, all of us will help long term. I mean, some of the stuff, we can get rid of, like wearing a mask every day, but understanding that it's part of the thing right now. But there's some good long-term things that will come out of this, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, part of what really got the public's attention about the impact on sports was when certain leagues started canceling football. And I'm curious for you, because you alluded to this in the Lead One call, and I know it's been this evolution of file save as, as you said, on forecasting, and consistently changing what the models are going to look like as new decisions and new information comes available. But do you feel like that was the biggest shift of when the MAC decided we're not going to play football this fall? Or do you feel like it was a bigger impact when the Big Ten decided they were going to go conference only?
Well, I'll start kind of from the beginning. So we recognize the distribution in June from the NCAA in next year, right? So we're already dipping down. It wasn't last year's budget that didn't meet. It's this year's budget that didn't meet, when we were like $1 million short from the NCAA. So, going to March when we were planning for things, we were already $1 million down from the NCAA tournament knowing what the distribution was going to be like for the NCAA. So that was kind of the first hit. The second hit was sort of some reserves money that we were counting on for FY20 that we obviously wouldn't have for 21. We got a coach payout, and that moved into the next year and kind of helped us with some resources. So we were already sort of in arrears there, and then we had some other expenses that we couldn't control, and so we really started with sort of a $3 million deficit going into starting in March, before anything happened with fall. And then, so we rectified that, right? We reviewed our option. That's when we unfortunately and hopefully temporarily reduced our scholarship number to full grant and aid, not up to cost of attendance. Managed some sport operating budgets, which again, we hadn't done yet. We hadn't done in all the cuts we've made before. So we're sort of dipping down. We changed some appointments for graduate assistants. We've changed, some fundamental stuff that we could count on saving, right? So from a staff standpoint. So we got there. And I think we were still planning on football happening at that $3 million. And yeah, then, and it's a good, because we'd already done the heavy lift. We'd already told our kids. I sat with our student athletes. I mean, this was a heavy lift to do these things we did. And then everything else has happened, right? The Big Ten thing. I mean, we were counting on two revenue streams. So we were going to play Maryland and Iowa, and the Iowa was the guarantee, right? So Maryland, it was a home and home. So it was 350 to 350 in an alternating year. But Iowa was 1.1. I mean, we had teams in our league that $4 million they lost that day that the Big Ten made the decision to be conference only. And that I joke a little bit. It's not funny, but I felt like at that time when Big Ten decided they were changing their philosophy on conference only, I felt like we just lost like $1 million a day. And I was like, I mean, there's no way that we can't keep up. Just decisions that were made. And then we were obviously reviewing the solution to home football games, should we have them, right? So we're at 20. So our state would allow 20% capacity in our stadium. Well, by the time you get through, season tickets and comps and student, player guests and whatever, that's it. So, game day walk-ups and great promotions and selling out the stadium and, and if we have reduced schedule, what does that mean for our Learfield agreement or concessions? And, all those auxiliaries that you're like 20%, 20%, 20%, chairbacks, bench backs, the premium seating, everything, 20%. And I'm like, $1 million, Iowa, 1.1 or what it was. And then this 20% thing. And I'm like, we just can't. We can't. I mean, everyone, I've gotten the question quite a bit, and I'm sure my athletic director has too, and other people, but, have you retained all your sports? And the answer is yes. So if that was on the list, you don't need to ask. We have, and I know Minnesota, I guess, just dropped a few, but they had 25 sports. So that's a lot. And I don't know that will be the last. I don't know. I think people were sort of on the edge anyway, and now I'm hoping no, because unfortunately it's the sports that don't get the recognition and the publicity that unfortunately go by the wayside, which is a really, really just an awful part of our business.
I think cutting sports is probably the hardest decision, and the one that just requires so much thinking ahead of what's the ripple effect. It's not just saving cost savings, because it's going to impact enrollment to the university. It's going to impact, there's just so much, and once you do it, you can't undo it. It's really hard to undo that. And so I think that's a conversation that people who've gone through it or have had to consider and weigh out all the options and really vet these decisions out, like schools like yours have really had to do that. But I think that there's so much, and you alluded to this earlier about the differences in responses, even in the Lead One webinar, which was great because there's different perspectives. But Power Five versus even, Group of Five and other mid majors of, how you've had to operate. And there's a CFO at Long Beach State, which they're not even a football school, but they're constantly saying, we've cut through fat a long time ago. Now we're cutting into muscle.
Oh, for sure.
And it's just one of those things that the larger schools that have more resources, they have their own bigger challenges of no football and all of that. I mean, that's a huge catastrophic impact for them. But at the same time, they're just now addressing the low-hanging fruit, where now you're having to climb up on someone else's shoulders to reach, what's next. And I think that, makes it harder. And even, we talked a little bit about the metrics that you look at to keep your finger on the pulse of the financial health of your athletic department, and that looks different in different size schools. So can you mention a little bit about what you talked about in the webinar and just how you and Sean Fraser, your AD, are communicating so that he's made aware about those items as well?
Yeah, I mean, over half of our budget is really relies on institutional support. So that's obviously and a number of that has been asked of us to reduce over time. And again, as we talked about this earlier, what we're really attempting to focus a lot of our efforts on is generating external revenue, whether it is filling in the bucket of a decrease in institutional support intentionally, or we talked about this a little bit of enrollment maybe not being meeting marks from a student fee standpoint. And it's always been the strategic goal of increasing the percentage of our budget compared to what our institution again very generously provides. So how do we do the extras? How do we control our destiny on moving our department to a level that is new, right? And when it's funny because I was on the hiring committee when we hired Sean, and that's the first question I asked him. I said, we've got to get out of debt from our institution. Not debt, I mean, as far as going over budget, but debt institutional funding. I said, so you tell me what are the top 3 things you're going to do as AD to come in and get us to where we can control more of what we want to control? Because when you're always asking for money, it's just like when you ask your parents for money. That's why you go out and get your own job and not rely on an allowance. You want to be able to go do what you want, not have to. They ask you, well, what are you doing with this? You're like, well, it's my money, so I'm going to do what I want to with it. He came in and did some great things and really set some really great things in process. I mean, we changed a lot of our football schedule to kind of see if that temperature would happen, if that would increase our fan base, bringing BC to Heskey Stadium, or, bringing these Power 5 schools in to play us at home. Does that get our people, our fans, excited and rocking along? And again, this is one of these things that when you're at a place that has some not predictable revenue streams, and ones you want to grow, you have to just throw some things out. I mean, you have to get the dartboard out, and maybe this is something I should have had earlier, not just for COVID, but you have to just see what the temperature is going to take. It's like any business. It's like, well, where's my best option to really generate revenue? And so, and we've planted a lot of seeds, and luckily those have gotten us through quite a number of our years of this. Like you said, and I am going to use that from Long Beach, so you'll have to let the person know that I'm using it. But you're right. I mean, we were always very, very proud of the fact that we supported our student athletes up to cost of attendance and across the board. So it wasn't just, primary sports or whatever you want to call them. It was everybody. And we were always very, very proud of our ability to do that. What we raised for it, how we managed other buckets to make sure it would happen. So that was a real disappointment, I think, for all of us to have to put that on pause for, again, hopefully a year. But who knows? I mean, Clayton's like, well, it'll be, 6 years from now before we, I hope not, right? I hope it's not that long before we start digging out and things start looking a little different. But like Sean says all the time, the virus is going to decide.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I know in the past we've had fun conversations about in our spare time, we're going to go lobbying to change financial reporting models and things like that that just don't tell the right picture. It's not apples to apples. And, the intent behind these reporting models that you have to follow that then becomes public record through various databases. And then, of course, the papers get a hold of it and tell their own story. And that's really at a disadvantage. So, how would you go about improving awareness around the issues that schools like NIU and other group of five and mid-major schools are dealing with from just, the public perception of the financial state, and then what kind of context would you add to that to really complete this picture there?
Yeah, I think a lot of especially everyone in our league, I can speak to them because we have a little business managers call on occasion, and I know you see this come up with schools in our league quite a bit. But the faculty or the campus reviewing big revenue bucket percentages. I mentioned before, we shouldn't hide the fact that to run an athletic department, Division I FBS athletic department at NIU is an investment on the campus. It is. They make an investment, and we don't want to shy away from that. We want to be honest about it. But sometimes numbers can either help you, or sometimes people go in and really make them hurt you. What I would want is for us to have a dialogue about it, right? Instead of saying, such and such, the athletic department gets student fees of a such and such amount, that's not fair, it should go to another part of the institution. And let's just have a dialogue. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about why those fees were instituted and what's the value proposition that we're bringing to our institution. Instead of just kind of putting those figures out there without context. I think that's critical. We've presented to faculty senate. We have our board of trustees is very favorable for us, and we're transparent about our situation. And we also honor the resources we were provided and that we earn, and that, except for this year, right? This is not a good year, but we honor our budgetary situation. So it's not like we're 10 million in the hole or something. We honor what we have. And we have I've been here decades, and it's been great. And we've been able to really protect and use our resources in the best way and most honorable way, I think, for our department and our institution. So it's just that. I think also the expense side of the worksheet is extremely interesting if you take the time to look at it. I also believe that people stop at the revenue sheet. They're like, where are these monies going and why aren't we getting it instead of you? They don't even get to the second part. When we're sitting here, we may not this year or FY21 because of the cost of attendance thing, but we spend more money on grant and aid than we do on salaries.
And that goes back to the university.
Right.
People don't understand that.
No, and then so if you go through and take all those pieces and parts, back out. Someone's done that. I think Jamie Pollard did when I got in the business like 18 years ago. He did something like saying about analyzing all of the expenses that are interdepartmental, right? That you're just, duplicating services or, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Physical plant, how much of what you're generating and your income is going back to supporting, campus partners, which again, we should do. We should spend our money where we work. I don't have an issue with that. It's unfortunate that's not a granular question. I don't know if I'd want to actually do the data dive for that. Nobody out there, probably people are like, that's terrible. It's a terrible idea, but it might help you. I think Central Michigan, the AD at Central Michigan a few years ago, he's at Arizona State now, I think, but he did a huge study on that. I think he probably was getting some pressure on institutional support and said, well, but it pretty much all goes back to the institution, if you look at a percentage basis. And I always thought that was if you had time to figure that out, that would be an interesting, I don't want to add it to the NCAA financial. Don't quote me on that.
Oh, that would just that would be a nightmare. But it's so important though, just to remember that part of the story that, the money that is, if they're looking at your bottom line, or even if they're just looking at revenue, that there's so much give and take, and it's like, okay, moving money from the left pocket to the right pocket, it's still as a whole, part of the ecosystem that you're in, and it's not, that you're just being frivolous with your revenues or overspending, and then, not even to mention there's things that aren't even on the report, like capital improvements and
Sure.
all of that.
Right.
So
Well, and
yeah.
I think, and I think it comes down to just communication, right? I mean, your athletic director obviously needs to have a sense of what the data is out there says. And you also need to make sure, and they have a stake in the NCAA financial report that's submitted, your president, right? So the sign off of your president, while it's sometimes for those of us on this end really cumbersome to get done, because you're like, I need it done and I need it done today or whatever, the situation. But super critical that they can kind of elevator speech what they're doing for their department or what is happening. Again, it's the golf story all over again. People find out that you're working college athletics. Man, on and on. I mean, I actually found out from him, Minnesota was dropping the 4 sports because he's on some Big Ten ticker thing because he went to Purdue. But it just got so interesting. So, I mean, even our president having like a little elevator speech of those percentages. We talked about our ADs having the metrics. Well, I would almost argue that our president gets more questions about us than sometimes our AD. So
Sure.
It goes beyond that. It's like, well, give her the top 5 things, give her the top 5 questions that come up, and just so she has them in case she gets stuck somewhere and needs to get a bailout. So
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I've seen, because I've been in these meetings with you where you are engaging with campus, your partners on campus, and really informing them and making sure they fully understand the nuances of college athletics finances. And that is a great point because, presidents are involved in board of trustee or state level discussions or potentially even league discussions. And, they need to be made aware of everything at all times so that have the right context to make the best decisions for the university.
yeah, for sure. I mean, especially, right now. I mean, the decision to move fall to spring. I mean, I believe the president's made the decision for the leagues, and that's how it should work. That's who we report to. But I feel like in the Mid-American Conference situations, we need it all in because we all knew if we decided to do this, it was going to be a financial hardship, likely more than we had already planned for. And so having that, hey, I got you. We're making this decision, and we understand what the potential financial ramifications might be. And I feel really great that our president had full awareness, and others too. So again, going in there with the right information to say, okay, we know what this is going to be, and this is we know what information we have, and this is the decision we're making. So
yeah. Well, what piece of advice would you give to your peers across college athletics?
The business manager people who are listening here and watching us, is that who I'm talking to?
Business managers or anyone going for the AD chair or just trying to run a successful athletics department and think outside the box?
Yeah, I think to my business manager people, I would say volunteer for everything. I mean, again, this is outside of COVID, right? This is not the COVID time. Of course, I would do that now for sure, because then you have a really good sense of your value when you add to the institution and the department. But I would try to keep doing that. I mean, that's how I built my career. It started, I was a business manager, right, at a FCS athletic department in San Marcos, Texas. And again, I had an accounting background, so I had that kind of cachet when I talked to people on campus. But other than that, I didn't have a lot of experience within an athletic department. But I volunteered for everything. Someone says, oh, who wants to oversee X? I'm like, I will. Who wants to do this? I will, right? So I feel like, and it might have been a detriment some points in my career, possibly, but I would just say you can't volunteer for enough things. Because at some point, we all may want to not just be a business manager anymore. I would say too, not COVID advice for people who really love this business. Shimmy up to your athletic director and get a sport, oversee a sport. It's a game changer. It's absolutely a game changer. It changes every way that you can lead. Because again, when you're kind of in the weeds of a spreadsheet or social media graphic or even a fundraising campaign, it seems like more like a job, right? This business, you could do it anywhere. Mm-hmm. As soon as you oversee a sport and you have a head coach reporting to you and you have kids relying on you to lead, it changes the entire dynamic of the profession. I wouldn't work anywhere where I didn't do that. I mean, obviously, if we get out of the business, I wouldn't do it, but it just changes everything about how you lead people and how you see the whole department. I think that's another thing that I think business managers get a little bit narrowed in on. It's like, well, how do I make my budget balance? Well, sometimes you can't, right? And then you got to go to plan B because you can't, because you just can't, or whatever. I mean, the circumstances don't support it. And I think some people get a little focused in on that. Like, what's the big picture? Like, is it one thing that overran, or is it everything? How do we still make this work? How do we still look at the big picture of operation and by the end of 12 months, we're good. But I think it's just hard. It's just working through an experience and messing up, to be honest with you. I probably screwed up more than I've done really good. But I would say those two things: volunteer for everything, and if you love this business and you want to have it for the long term, you've got to figure out how to supervise a sport, even if it's something that's not necessarily high level. Maybe it's a tennis program or something that doesn't have a lot of student athletes, so it makes it a little bit easier. Or some, don't jump into maybe overseeing football right away, but maybe just get your feet wet with some leadership that you didn't know you had. Mm-hmm. So, two things I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell the people that supervise a sport, they just look at it completely differently. I know someone in the industry that has talked about, as they continue to move around to different schools, go following their career path, they want to stay with a school small enough to still allow to be involved in supervising a sport, because that's just where the passion is.
Yeah, it's a game changer, really. I mean, I have a friend who's in the Pac-12 and she's been there a long time, and she did recently, pre-COVID. Of course, she probably doesn't want it now, but she oversaw sports. She texted me the day that it happened, and she's like, I cannot believe this has happened. I'm so happy. Again, it all depends. I mean, some people are like, this isn't that's not what I want to see my career progress as. But again, for those of you that are out there that are just like, I love this business and I wanted to be in it for the long haul, it really does changes your perspective. And again, I think it changes the way you lead. I really do. Mm-hmm. You just have a different stake in the game.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, and I like what you said about, you've probably screwed up, but it's okay. I call it failing forward, in that, you go a few steps forward, a few steps back, but you're still ahead, inch by inch. So keep trying. And
yeah,
that's how you get to where you're at today.
Well, and I think some of it is just being vulnerable and admitting that that wasn't the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. And moving forward. You're right. Failing forward. Yeah. And I mean, again, I don't think nobody has, everyone's made mistakes in some fashion. I think it's how you react to them and repair and move on. So yeah, again, like I said, this little intern I have who plays basketball for us, she's got a great situation where she can really not only figure out how to lead during a crisis, but watch other people try to do it, and say, well, I wouldn't do it that way. I mean, I've been in the business 18 years, and that, you always do that. You're like, oh, that person, I wouldn't do it that way. You always feel like you can make better decisions, but then when you're actually making the decisions, it looks completely different. So I don't know. I'm interested to see how she ends up in the business, 10 years from now. She says she wants to be a coach. I'm gonna try to talk her out of
it. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for your willingness to share and be so candid with us today. And, your AD, Sean Frazier, is someone that's been in the public spotlight a lot, and I admire a lot of what he stands for in taking leadership during COVID and during diversity and inclusion and racial equity. And, I think he's able to do that because he has such a strong team with him to really lead a successful flagship, grit, a department with a lot of grit. And I know you have been, hugely a right-hand person to him. And I, admire you a lot for what you're doing. Thank you also to our listeners for tuning in to News and Brews Sports Biz as we advocate for college athletics, financial voices to be heard. Please make sure you subscribe to this series on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, please go in and give us a rating or leave a review, or even if you tell a friend about us, that would be really helpful to us as well. You can visit our website, jmco.com, and contact me if you have a topic you'd like to see for a future show, or if you would like to join us, or even if you have some brew recommendations for us to feature on a future episode. So continue to follow us on social media as more news comes up and things continue to evolve in the college athletics space. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you, Debra. Go Huskies. And cheers.
Cheers.
All right, have a great day.
All right, bye.